Hi, happy Friday. It's Jen Wilson here at Leadership Lunch Chat with my good friend Amy Vetter. Hey, Amy.
Hello. Happy to be here with you.
I am too. Always good to be with Amy, processing the leadership ideas and issues facing the profession, facing us in our practices, facing us in our companies that we're running, and in our families and lives. And so today, Amy and I thought we'd talk a little bit about strategic planning and really sort of the process that you have to go through, the thinking process, the thoughtful process that you have to go through when you're creating a strategy for something. And one of the ways that she and I got to this topical idea is because I have recently accepted a role as the independent facilitator for the National Pipeline Advisory Group, creating a national pipeline strategy or strategic plan for addressing the issues in talent and the pipeline in the accounting profession.
Mhm.
And we are creating a strategic plan. And we were talking a little bit about process, and all of a sudden we were like, hey, this would make a good subject for strategic planning. So anyway, that's what we're going to do. And Amy, I don't know if you want to say a few setup words before we dig in.
Yeah. So I think what happens when we're trying to solve an issue is it's very hard to envision something that doesn't exist today. And the mindset to open up to just allow yourself to not look at your circumstances in this moment. It actually reminds me, and I put it out this week. There's a podcast with Alan Colton that I did, and we were talking about him being a chess player. And one of the things that he said is you close your eyes and you envision the future, like what would be the plays, what would be the strategies, and so forth, but not the how, right? Because it hasn't happened yet. And I think that's such an important thing of when you're going into any kind of strategic planning process is imagining possibility, not based on today of like, if you had a clean slate, what could this look like? And trying to keep out of the mindset of all the mechanics of what it would take to get to that, because you'll solve for that if you decide that that's the way you want to go. But really clearing your head to be present in just the imagination, the creativity, the visioning process.
Man, that idea of clear your head is so important. And, one of the things that we have to be careful about, all of us, every single one of us that comes together to create a vision plan for a firm or a strategic planning for a service line or industry niche or something, or an operating plan for a new technology initiative, or when creating the national pipeline strategy, is that you have to be so careful not to be entrenched, not to come with "I already know."
Yes.
So, like, I love where Alan is in your podcast, which I absolutely dearly loved, because I dearly love you and I dearly love Alan. So everybody should listen to that, and let's make sure, Caroline, that we put a link to it in this conversation out in social. But I love that idea of envisioning where we want to head and the possibilities, and not being stuck in where are we now or what steps would it take to get there. One of the hardest things to do as a facilitator in strategy is to have people sort of check their "I already know" at the door.
Mm-hmm.
And the coolest thing about working on this pipeline initiative is the super bright minds, the 21 bright panelists, if you will, or participants in this advisory group, and the smart people that are supporting it from a staff perspective. They all have a lot of knowledge, and they all have a lot of information and experience and all that stuff. And so it's easy to come in and be like, I already know my part, or I've studied this and I know. And so that doesn't create this sort of collective magical collaboration that can happen if everybody sort of comes in entrenched or stuck in a position or a perspective, even stuck in a perspective. We've got to listen and look through each other's perspectives, because we only have our own sort of eyesight, if you will. But if we really get together and listen without attachment, we can hear each other's views and really see them, and then start to maybe shift and come closer to each other, which is what's really critical in creating something as big as a pipeline, national pipeline strategy, is to come together. We all want to solve the same thing. We all could unify and use our collective strength and smarts and good intentions if we didn't come from like positions.
Yeah.
And instead we came from, hey, let's learn together. Let's listen.
Yeah. And it's very much similar to diversity discussions, right?
Yes.
It's being able to recognize unconscious bias and what it's like to walk in other people's shoes. And a lot of times when these things are being solved, it's being solved by people that's not the shoes we're solving for, right? We're solving because we have experience. We have been there, done that, but we haven't been there, done that in this day and age. So for a college student today to sit in their shoes and to think like a college student today is very different than when we went to college, and what the parameters were around the profession and how you chose your degree and what you weighed around that versus what this generation thinks about and so forth. So when we go into discussions like this, and that's why it's so important to bring so many people, but then there's the more people.
Yes.
Like there's the people that are going to take that information and try to create strategy off of it. But then it's extending out to all the people that it impacts. And a lot of times when you get feedback from people that don't think like you haven't solved it. You might have thought you solved it.
Right.
But the thoughts and the way that they think, you kind of forget how to think that way because you haven't been there for a long time. You know, I mean, I think we both experienced that this year going into a firm and talking to some younger staff in the firm and forgetting what it was like to have the pressure of the CPA exam, have the pressure of time and billing, and what that feels like when you want to learn other things and you think more things are important than the things that are the chargeable codes, and so forth, and what that feels like as far as, you know, I think a lot of people, I hear people say many times that, you know, this generation doesn't think the same. They just want money and so forth. I don't see that. I see that they want to learn and grow and be expanded. And when they feel stifled, which many of us felt, if we go back and remember what it felt like to be at that level, we just didn't think there was an opportunity to go in another path. Like there weren't as many paths available. Things weren't just as accessible. It wasn't as accessible to have a business when you are in college as today. And so, you know, I look at my children and the things that they say and, you know, and the experience that they've had in jobs and their perspective of how people interact and what's important and what's not important. And you forget what it's like to be from the other, you know, what it's like when you're coming up. And so I think it's really important when you're doing a strategy, visioning possibilities, that you're bringing in other points of view besides the people that have already gotten there.
I couldn't agree more. And I was just sitting here thinking when you were saying, you know, we have forgotten what it's like. We can't rely on our memory, but we also can't guess, you know, there are actual people to ask that know what it's like because they're living it, you know, so any process has to be inclusive, right? And you have to include as many stakeholders and as many, you know, points of view as possible. And when we do vision planning inside a firm, we always say we want to make sure that we're surveying the staff and seniors and managers as well as partners and operational leaders. And then in the vision committee, we want to have even a few seniors on the committee, on the strategic planning committee. In the olden days, the partners went off on the mountain and created the strategy. But that's not, you know, if you're trying to say, where do we want this to be in 5 years, you want to include stakeholders at different levels.
Will be there in 5 years.
Yeah, for sure. And the other and the cool thing about this project that I'm facilitating related to the national pipeline is that they're super committed to a really inclusive process. And they picked this very diverse group with lots of different stakeholder representation. But they've also are identifying a really robust list of stakeholders to include throughout the process in various ways. And I'm really encouraged about, the idea that we could all unify here and all get somewhere together if we're willing to do that. And one more thought about entrenchment. I just want to make a note for Caroline also, and maybe Amy, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but Adam Grant, who is a thought leader in talent and a popular professor at Wharton on organizational design and development, he's got a really cool 16-minute TED Talk on entrenchment, and it's about the frog in the hot pot of water, and that it doesn't notice when the heat's being turned up, and that's actually a fallacy. And he says that later the frog will jump out if you don't put a lid on it, because he does notice. But the idea that we just sort of sit in the pot of water that we're in, that we've always been in, and we don't really notice when conditions have changed, and make the jumps and leaps and shifts in our thinking that we have to make. And he talks about entrenchment and how dangerous it can be in this time of market change. And it's not just change in the profession, it's change in the global dynamics and demographics, and the US demographics, and just the business climate, and this kind of irrational market that we're operating in, and a whole bunch of the technology innovation that's happening. I mean, there's so many cool things, and also some pretty good looming threats that we have to pay attention to. We can't afford to come from, I already know, we can't afford to come from, let's do
scarcity.
Scarcity. And let's talk about that in a second. But we also can't afford to come from, well, this is what we've always done. I mean, that's almost the most dangerous thing to say, right?
Anytime.
Yeah. For you and I, it's always like, but I mean, right now, more than ever before, it's just like the most dangerous place to stand.
Yeah.
So talk about scarcity.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's what needs to be addressed that we don't like to address is emotion. And, when we go into these discussions, and to me, scarcity is based in fear. And it is fear. And, we talk about, Jen and I have talked about this a lot, of generosity and leadership. And you can't help, because you've got to support your own families, is what does this mean for me? And that's a hard mindset to come into any kind of visioning process, because it may mean that in the future there isn't a you. There might not be the same type of roles, the same type of jobs, the same type of ways people are compensated. All of those things might change. And you have to go into a visioning process or a strategic process willing to make it bigger than yourself, and not coming from a scarcity mindset. And when you feel yourself or aware, or have some guidelines within the visioning process to alert when that's happening, when you can come together and say, we need to be careful, we're going down that path, where it's a safe place to identify when that's happening and why it's happening. Because when you feel emotion rise on something that doesn't exist, there's something internally in you to be aware of that is happening for you. And that's a practice of, how do I breathe through this? How do I get back to being present and realize this is bigger than me? And it doesn't mean that anything bad is going to happen to anyone personally, but it does mean there will most likely be change. You may need to be nurtured through it, and you may need to nurture others through it as well, in order to get there, because it's going to be a learning process for everyone. But I think the scarcity mindset of there not being enough, instead of looking at how much the possibility is, and you'll get there and solve it, and not trying to solve for that, but really keeping your head away from that when you're aware of it.
Yeah, I love that. And so you touched on a number of things. One is when I am feeling upset and when I do feel like, oh my gosh, I'm losing control or I'm losing something, it's usually our selfish interest that's at play. We're having selfish thoughts, like you said, and so that's just something to think about. It isn't all about me, and I am not likely, to lose in this. I might give up some things here or have to sort of let go of expectations or how I thought it might turn out. But over here, I'm going to gain, because if it's a good process, everybody wins. A good strategic planning process takes us together collectively to a better place. And so it's, there might be small concessions in the collaboration, or things we give up or de-emphasize or whatever it is. But in the end, we all could rally around this possibility, because it's going to be a better place. If it's not, then what's the point of the plan?
Right.
But the other piece of it is there's this concept in scarcity that I just want to call us to think about in leadership. And that is the idea of being generative. So when I'm thinking small and scarce and I'm afraid, I'm more operating from this stuff is happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't have control, or I don't have, I can't affect it. And so I like to try to get leaders to think about, like, generatively, what could we generate in terms of possibility? What problems are we trying to solve? That's super critical. But then what are the possibilities? You've used that word a couple of times. I have too. And not be stuck in the how, not be stuck in the mundane ideas of implementation, not get caught up in the what if this and what if that, but just like what's possible, and really dream big, and generate together. And I just think a lot of times we feel like, gosh, these are the circumstances. This is what the market's doing to me. This is how it is, and I can't generate or innovate. And instead, I'm going to protect. Now I'm going to have to protect. And anytime we're in protection, we're kind of losing ground, in my opinion. We're moving backwards. Yeah. So, one of the things that we always, love to hear in strategic planning is that everything's on the table. Everything's, we'll look at all possibilities to generate from it. I think that's great. Another place I want to take us, because I think
before you do that, I just want to highlight something, a word you said,
yes,
to take you out of scarcity when that happens, and that is belief. You've got to have belief in what you're doing. And so it's really important that before you start anything, everyone believes in what you're doing. And when the moments of scarcity happen, when the moments of fear happen, if you can come back to, but we're here because we believe this, and we believe that this is possible. We just don't know how to get there yet, but we all have that common vision and bond together. Then no one's on an island by themselves. And so it's really important before going into anything that you've solved that. Because if you don't believe in the same thing, if you don't believe in the possibility of the future or whatever strategy that you need to solve, then you're going to have conflict throughout the strategic process.
So I know how important the word belief is to you. I love that you brought it up, because I'm going to use a synonym, in my opinion, a synonym, and that's faith. And not faith like religious. It could be religious, but it doesn't have to be. It's, faith in possibility, faith that things turn out for the best, faith that collectively we can cause something here. One of the things that I like to tell groups is, we can make magic. We're smart enough. We're with the right information, with the right people involved, with the right intentions. we can cause something no one else has caused. And it's that's faith, that's belief, that's something calling you forward, and you have to have it. I agree 100%. Something else I was going to say to you, because we're talking about strategy and how to create the very best vision and strategic plan, and how our who we're being can get in the way. That's really what we're talking about here.
Mhm.
And so one of the who we're beings is, well, I have kind of an idea of where I want to take this thing. So let's just hammer out some solutions, or let's talk about tactics even.
Right.
Some people, I teased Amy when we discussed this possible session. I said, let's create a strategic plan. Okay, let's be sure when we're in the strategic planning and envisioning process that we talk about the possibility of some more advertising or social media. Or it's like, no, we're not. We can't talk about solutions or tactics or let's do this and let's do that until we talk about, like, where do we envision ourselves going and what are we trying to generate and what are we solving for?
Right.
And we have to stay in that higher place of thinking and envisioning. And most of us are called to, let's make a project plan and assign tasks and go. And it is such a challenge as a facilitator.
Yeah.
And in the case of the National Pipeline Project, the marketplace is trying to solve it, like with solutions. But, we can't go there yet.
Mhm.
We have to really define the vision and then the problems we're solving for. And that's the phase we're in right now. But it's very difficult for all of us. We want to just,
Take action.
you and I do it too. If we can do it and fall into the habit of going right to, let's talk about solutions and then let's task things.
Yeah.
And that'll get you somewhere, but it might not get you to the full possibility.
Right.
And it won't get you to solving root cause issues. And root cause issues are critical. Whatever they might be, you've got to figure out what are the possible opportunities, and then what are the problems that are going to really get us, and what are the root of those issues, and how can we create real strategies and then tactics to address them. So
yeah, you're solving for the big things, not the small.
And the small things will resolve
over time. Yeah.
They'll either resolve or they'll disappear or they'll
Right.
improve because you've gone to the root. And
Mhm.
and that's a real challenge, and it requires deep thinking and a
Right.
lot of learning and study,
Yeah.
and getting a lot of thoughts from different stakeholders to really see it the way it is. So
we could go in a whole, I'm stopping myself because we could go in a whole nother direction with that. And I know we're out of time. So next time.
And hopefully this isn't our only leadership lunch chat. So,
Exactly.
And I can't remember, so maybe you remember whether or not we're both here and doing this next Friday. I hope so. You might look real quick, but for all of those that are tuning in, Amy and I try to process issues that we are facing and thinking about, but we really love the idea of interacting with you and talking about topics you're thinking about and worrying over. So in social, you can sure tell us things you'd like to make sure that we address on Fridays at noon when we stream. And I think we're probably here next week. I'm not sure of that. I'm sorry about that. We've had a crazy summer, but most Fridays at noon we're streaming. So please tune in, check. And of course we publish our events ahead of time. So you'll see it in social and then you'll know for sure. Thanks, Amy, so much for processing today with me about strategic planning and envisioning and the mindset of that. I appreciate it. Thanks, Caroline, for the support. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Take care.